Hadi bolu.
The circumstances of this heinous crime are bone-chilling. This video from inside the home, in her house, racing around, walking around with something behind her back. It was later determined that something was the family's .357 Magnum.
On March 19th, 2024, a quiet neighborhood in Brandon, Mississippi was shattered by a crime that most people had a hard time even fathoming. It raised not only questions about the systems in place for mental health, but also how much of a gap is there truly between an event that could have been avoided and those that were racing to a red light. 14-year-old Carly Gregg, a teen that found herself in the awkward stages of adolescence, was at the center of a crime that would change her family forever. The day of March 19th, 2024 started as an ordinary day in the Smiley household. Heath Smiley, Carly's stepfather, left in the early morning to go to work, and Ashley and Carly did their normal morning routine before heading to school. But the day would soon descend into a horrific sequence of events that left the community reeling. And by the time the sun had set, Ashley Smiley, a beloved teacher, mother, and wife, was dead. And her daughter, Carly Gregg, stood accused of her murder. That afternoon, Carly returned home from school with Ashley. Tensions were already simmering. Ashley, reportedly suspicious of her daughter's behavior, began searching Carly's room and discovered vape pens amongst other items, suggesting that Carly was hiding something. And whether it was a blind rage directly caused from arguing or if it was a slow buildup of stress, anger, embarrassment, and shame, this confrontation seemed to ignite what would come next. Unbeknownst to Ashley, Carly had gone into her parents' bedroom and retrieved a .357 Magnum pistol from beneath their mattress. Surveillance footage from the kitchen revealed Carly walking back towards her room, taking a quick peek from the hallway to make sure that nobody was around, while she concealed the gun behind her back. Moments later, gunshots shattered the air. Three rounds were fired, and Ashley was hit with all three. Her cries of pain quickly followed those of the gunshots, but any plea or cry for help never came. Carly quickly came back into the kitchen. However, she didn't call for help. Instead, the teen texted her stepfather, Heath, from her mother's phone, simply asking, "When will you be home, honey?" To anyone else, it might have seemed like an inconspicuous message, but to Carly, it was part of a chilling plan. In the immediate aftermath, Carly invited a friend over to the house. When her friend arrived, Carly led them through the home and reportedly asked, "Are you squeamish around dead bodies?" She then directed their attention to her mother's lifeless body, casually discussing what had happened as though the gravity of her actions hadn't fully registered. Heath arrived sometime later, unaware of the carnage inside. As he stepped into the home, Carly, lying in wait, ambushed him. A single shot grazed his shoulder, but Heath managed to wrestle away the weapon from his stepdaughter before escaping to safety. His frantic 911 call captured his shock and fear.
Okay, just calm down for me. We got everybody in. She what? She killed her mom. She killed her mom? Yeah, that's what I'm screaming about. Where's the mom? When I do this, she tried to kill me. Where's the mom at? Sir, where's your wife? She's dead on the floor in my stepdaughter's room. She's on the floor in your stepdaughter's room? What's your wife's name? Ashley Smiley. Ashley Smiley?
Police were called, arriving at a scene that defied comprehension. Inside of the home, they found Ashley Smiley's body lying in a pool of blood, with evidence of the violent confrontation still scattered around. Carly was taken into custody without any resistance. During her trial, the prosecution painted Carly as a manipulative teenager who meticulously planned her actions, even hiding one of the home's security cameras in a refrigerator. They argued that the catalyst was Ashley's discovery of Carly's hidden life involving drugs, which had been exposed by a worried friend. However, the defense presented a different narrative. A troubled teenager overwhelmed by a mental health crisis. Carly had reportedly been experiencing severe mood swings, hearing voices, and struggling with dissociative episodes exacerbated by a recent change in her medication. But why did this seemingly ordinary teenager snap so violently? Was it a momentary break fueled by emotional distress? Or was it a calculated act of rebellion against her mother's authority? Carly's journal, filled with dark entries such as "It's okay to be evil" and "You don't need your family," provided unsettling glimpses into her state of mind, but no definitive answers. The case left the courtroom and the community grappling with conflicting emotions and unanswered questions. What drove Carly to invite a friend into such a gruesome scene? Did her stepfather's testimony about her appearing possessed hold a deeper truth, or was it simply a reflection of his trauma? Did the years of unresolved tension finally culminate into an explosive breaking point? And above all, could this shocking sequence of events have been prevented? Carly Gregg grew up in Brandon, Mississippi, in what appeared, at least on the surface, to be a typical suburban household. Her mother, Ashley Smiley, was a respected and dedicated math teacher at Northwest Rankin High School. Ashley's life revolved around her students and her family, but the picture-perfect facade masked deeper troubles. Carly's stepfather, Heath Smiley, played an active role in her upbringing, but the dynamics within the Smiley household were anything but harmonious. Neighbors and acquaintances have described the household as tense, with frequent arguments breaking the suburban quiet. Although such conflicts are not uncommon in families, the strain in Carly's relationship with her mother was notable. Ashley's friends and colleagues both recall her voicing concerns about Carly's behavior in the months leading up to the tragedy. She reportedly struggled to navigate the challenges of raising a teenager, especially one grappling with the pressures of adolescence and potential mental health issues. I also wanted to mention that details about Carly's biological father remain elusive, raising questions about his absence and its potential impact on her development. But I will speak more on him later in this video. Experts have weighed in on the influence of family dynamics in shaping behavior, noting that unresolved conflicts combined with external stressors can create a very volatile environment. Carly's mental health became a focal point during her trial, with testimonies highlighting her history of depression, mood swings, and auditory hallucinations. Adding that with the absence surrounding Carly's biological father and the emotional toll these events will do to a person, especially that of a 14-year-old, offers no easy answers. What remains is an unsettling portrait of a family struggling behind closed doors. The chilling details of that day would later captivate the courtroom, but even then, the motives and emotions behind Carly's actions remained as murky as the trail of evidence left behind. The day began like any other, but ending as violently as it did ensured that it would never be forgotten. The trial of Carly Gregg, accused of murdering her mother Ashley and attempting to kill her stepfather Heath, unfolded over several days in a Rankin County courtroom, revealing a case fraught with complexity. Jurors and spectators grappled with conflicting narratives ranging from a calculated crime to a tragic act rooted in mental health struggles. Prosecutors portrayed Carly as a manipulative and defiant teenager who meticulously planned her actions. They painted a chilling picture of the events leading up to the murder, emphasizing the deliberate steps that Carly took on March 19, 2024. This includes retrieving a .357 Magnum from beneath her parents' mattress, firing 3 shots at her mother, and lying in ambush for her stepfather. Prosecutors argued that Carly's actions were premeditated, supported by her decision to text Heath from Ashley's phone after the murder, feigning normalcy to lure him home. State prosecutor Catherine White Newman highlighted damning pieces of evidence such as Carly hiding the home security camera in a refrigerator to obscure the events and later showing Ashley's lifeless body to a friend. Newman's closing arguments focused on the sheer deliberation behind each act, describing it as cold and calculated, rather than a crime born out of emotional distress or impulsiveness. Carly's defense team presented a drastically different narrative, arguing that the teenager was in the throes of a severe mental health crisis. They contended that she had been battling depression, mood swings, auditory hallucinations, and dissociative episodes, which worsened due to a recent change in her medication. Dr. Andrew Clark, a child psychologist, testified to Carly's deteriorating mental state, noting that she had reported hearing voices and experiencing memory blackouts, including on the day of the crime. Defense attorney Bridget Todd emphasized the lack of support Carly had received despite her evident struggles. They argued that the pressures of adolescence combined with the strained family relationships created a volatile environment that ultimately culminated in tragedy. The defense maintained that Carly did not fully comprehend the consequences of her actions, suggesting that the murder was an act of desperation rather than premeditation. Heath Smiley's emotional testimony was a pivotal moment in the trial. Describing the moments when Carly ambushed him, Heath recalled her blank, emotionless expression, which he likened to being possessed. The defense attempted to use his testimony to highlight Carly's dissociation, while the prosecution leveraged it as evidence of her intent and cold demeanor. Friends and colleagues of Ashley Smiley also testified, shedding light on the strained relationship between mother and daughter. They recounted Ashley's growing concerns about Carly's rebellious behavior, which included the discovery of burner phones and drug paraphernalia. After deliberating, the jury returned a guilty verdict on all charges, including first-degree murder, attempted murder, and evidence tampering. Carly Gregg, who is now 15, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She broke down in tears as the sentence was read, while the courtroom buzzed with reactions ranging from relief to disbelief. The trial answered some questions but left others unresolved. Was justice served, or did the court fail to fully account for Carly's mental health struggles? Could intervention by family, educators, or mental health professionals have prevented any part of this tragedy? The jury's decision brought legal closure but offered little solace to a community still grappling with the enormity of this crime. This trial, marked by its conflicting narratives and emotional testimony, will likely remain a point of discussion for years to come, emblematic of the complicated intersection of mental health, family conflict, and the justice system. Kevin Gregg, Carly's biological father, has spoken out following her conviction. Despite their estranged relationship, Kevin expressed deep remorse and lingering questions about the tragic event. In a heartfelt statement, he shared his love for Carly, laminating the missed opportunities to intervene. He questioned why Carly didn't reach out to him for help before the situation had escalated, saying, "I kept screaming in my head, why couldn't you have just called me?" Kevin revealed that Carly had a history of mental health struggles, including, as I've mentioned, the auditory hallucinations, which she has experienced since childhood. He noted that she had previously been enrolled in therapy to cope with these challenges. These revelations aligned with trial testimony from mental health professionals who described Carly's worsening mental state leading up to the shooting. Kevin's reflections underscores his anguish over her condition and the events that transpired. Despite his own personal pain, Kevin did not participate in Carly's defense or even attend the trial, a decision that has drawn much scrutiny. His absence highlights the strained dynamics within that family and leaves open questions about whether his involvement might have even altered the course of these events. Kevin's candid remarks reflect a father grappling with unimaginable loss and unanswered questions about his daughter's actions. The tragedy surrounding Carly Gregg raises haunting questions that will echo long after this case becomes seemingly forgotten by the mass public. Was this a calculated act of violence, or was this a desperate result of untreated mental illness? The courtroom may have rendered a verdict, but the fractured family, grieving community, and lingering uncertainty suggest that this story is far from resolved. Carly's actions and the circumstances leading to them challenge our understanding of accountability, mental health, and family conflict. As her new life unfolds behind bars, the unanswered questions remain a stark reminder of a tragedy that shattered a family and left a community searching desperately for answers. This case challenged perceptions of adolescence, family dynamics, and the cracks in the systems meant to support mental health. For now, it remains an open wound in the heart of a quiet Mississippi town, with the full story perhaps forever locked in the mind of Carly Gregg herself.
information tonight in the search for a missing Colorado teen who vanished from his father's home during a court-ordered visit. Later.
You should be doing backflips right now to take this polygraph test. You were the last person to have seen your son before he disappeared.
Do you know where he is?
No, I don't.
In the small serene town of Vallecito, Colorado, a place framed by towering pine trees and winding mountain roads, 13-year-old Dylan Redwine vanished without a trace in November 2012. The teen was spending a court-ordered visit with his father, Mark Redwine, a visit he reportedly dreaded. Dylan's mother, Eileen, had expressed concerns about her ex-husband's volatile temper, but no one could have predicted the dark secrets that would come to light as the search for Dylan unfolded. Dylan's disappearance triggered a massive search effort with friends, family, and authorities all combing the rugged wilderness surrounding Mark's remote home. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, and hope of any concrete answer on where Dylan was began to wane. As investigators dug deeper, they unearthed troubling clues that hinted at a strained relationship between father and son. Friends revealed that Dylan had been reluctant to visit Mark and had confided that he felt unsafe. Then came a bombshell discovery. Evidence suggesting Dylan may have stumbled upon compromising photographs of his father. Images that could shatter any semblance of trust between them. Investigators began to wonder, had Dylan confronted his father about what he saw? Could those photos have been the catalyst for an argument that spiraled out of control? Mark Redwine, a man who outwardly portrayed himself as a grieving father, quickly became the focus of the investigation. His alibi raised more questions than they answered, and his behavior in the days following Dylan's disappearance struck many as odd, even callous. He went on national television pointing fingers at Eileen and deflecting suspicion from himself. But despite the mounting circumstantial evidence, the case stalled. Mark Redwine, born August 24, 1961, was a twice-divorced father of two sons, embroiled in a bitter custody battle with his ex-wife, Elaine Hall. The tension between Mark and his youngest son, Dylan, had grown palpable in the months leading up to the visit. Dylan, reluctant to spend time with his father, confided in his older brother, Corey, about his discomfort. The source of their unease wasn't just the acrimonious divorce. It was a disturbing discovery the brothers had made in 2011. On their father's computer, Dylan and Corey had stumbled upon compromising photographs of Mark Redwine. In these shocking images, he appeared to be dressed in a wig and women's lingerie, eating what seemed to be feces from a diaper. The disturbing nature of these photos fractured the already strained father-son relationship. In the days before his visit, Dylan reached out to Corey asking him to send the photos. He intended to confront his father during their time together. Elaine, aware of Dylan's distress, was deeply concerned about the trip, but she was advised by her attorney that refusing to send Dylan could result in legal repercussions. Reluctantly, she sent her son to her father's remote cabin in the mountains, a decision that would go on to haunt her forever. Mark Redwine was no stranger to tension. Corey had already confronted him about the photos during a heated text exchange, taunting him with remarks like, "Hey beautiful, you are what you eat. Look in the mirror." Mark's reaction was reportedly one of anger and defensiveness, leaving Dylan walking into a volatile situation with a man who felt both exposed and betrayed. On November 18th, 2012, Mark Redwine arrived at the Durango-La Plata County Airport to collect his 13-year-old son, Dylan. Surveillance footage from the day shows little more than a brief, almost clinical exchange between father and son. There was no joyful reunion or warmth between them. Dylan had actually wanted to go spend the night with a friend, but his father refused. And they both retreated to Mark's isolated home in Vallecito, Colorado for the evening. The following morning, Dylan texted his friend arranging to meet at around 6:30 a.m. But when his friend reached out again at around 6:46 a.m., hoping to confirm plans, there was no reply. Dylan's last communication was at 9:37 p.m. the night before, and after that, silence. Mark Redwine later claimed that he left the house early that morning for errands, only to return home to find that his son was gone. But this story didn't sit well with Dylan's mother, Eileen, as she quickly suspected that Mark was hiding something, sparking an urgent investigation. As authorities combed the area, the case grew more sinister. Within days, a chilling detail emerged from Mark's past. One of his ex-wives came forward recalling a disturbing conversation that she had with him years earlier. Mark had casually said that if he ever needed to get rid of a body, he would simply leave it in the mountains. She also remembered an even darker threat made during their custody battle. He had told her that he would kill the kids before he ever let her have them. These revelations raised the terrifying possibility that Mark Redwine was more than just a distraught father. He may have been capable of something far darker. A large-scale search operation ensued, covering the rugged forest and mountains surrounding Mark's home. But as the days stretched on with no sign of Dylan, the growing sense of unease turned into something much worse. Dylan's fate seemed sealed in the grim silence of the wilderness. 7 months later, in June of 2013, Dylan's partial remains were found near Middle Mountain Road, roughly 8 miles from Mark's house. The discovery was unsettling for several reasons. First, the area was one that Mark was familiar with. He owned an ATV and had reportedly been seen driving alone in the area back in April of 2013, just a few months prior. Strangely, after the remains were discovered, Mark failed to return to the area to assist in the search, a detail that stood out to investigators. And it wasn't just his absence that raised eyebrows. It was a conversation that he had shortly after the remains were found. In that conversation, Mark ominously speculated that the rest of Dylan's body, including his skull, would need to be recovered before authorities could determine whether blunt force trauma was the cause of death. It was a strange statement, one that suggested a disturbing level of knowledge about the crime scene. Then came Mark's bizarre appearance on Dr. Phil in 2013. On national television, Mark and Dylan's mother, Eileen, exchanged accusations, each blaming the other for their son's disappearance. But perhaps the most curious aspect of Mark's appearance was his refusal to take a polygraph test, an act that many found suspicious. And as the investigation dragged on, other damning evidence began to surface. In August of 2013, police discovered traces of Dylan's blood and human cadaver scents in several areas of Mark's living room. According to court documents, a canine unit confirmed the presence of human remains, not just in the living room, but also in a washing machine and on the clothes Mark had worn on the night Dylan vanished. Further investigation revealed more unsettling findings. In February of 2014, a cadaver dog alerted authorities to the scent of human remains in several parts of Mark's Dodge truck. Each discovery was just another piece of the puzzle, one that painted a very chilling picture of a father who seemed all too familiar with the details of his son's death. Then, on November 1st, 2015, came another grim discovery. Dylan's skull was found further up Middle Mountain Road by hikers. This was the same location where his partial remains had been found more than 2 years earlier. The Colorado Parks and Wildlife Division confirmed the location, and forensic experts quickly ruled out the possibility that animals had moved the body. No animal known to the area would have carried a body that distance through the rugged terrain, and certainly no animal would have transported the skull an additional 1.5 miles. It raised a disturbing question. If animals hadn't moved Dylan's remains, who had? Despite mounting evidence, Mark Redwine's defense continued to claim his innocence. But as the case progressed, the haunting questions only grew louder. What happened during Dylan's visit to his father's home? Was this the tragic result of a volatile relationship? Or was there something more sinister at play? And why did Mark seem to know so much about the crime scene, yet remain oddly detached? The answers lie somewhere in the shadows of Middle Mountain Road, waiting to be uncovered. Years passed, and Dylan's family grew desperate for justice. Investigators refused to give up, painstakingly piecing together a case built on forensic science, digital footprints, and psychological profiling. In 2017, Mark Redwine was arrested and charged with second-degree murder and child abuse resulting in death. Prosecutors alleged that Dylan's discovery of the incriminating photos led to a confrontation that turned violent. But the trial, held nearly a decade after Dylan's death, was anything but straightforward. Mark maintained his innocence, insisting that he had no motive to harm his son. His defense team painted a picture of a grieving father scapegoated by a desperate ex-wife and overzealous investigators. On the other side, the prosecution painted a chilling picture of a father who not only had motive, but had acted with callous disregard for his son's life. They argued that the relationship between Mark and Dylan was strained, with Dylan having confided in friends that he was afraid of his father. Evidence presented during the trial revealed that Dylan had been in possession of compromising photos of Mark, which the prosecution believed could have led to a confrontation. Investigators speculated that the discovery of these photos triggered a violent argument between father and son, a confrontation that ultimately turned fatal. Throughout the trial, prosecutors pointed to the damning evidence collected over the years. Traces of Dylan's blood and cadaver scents found in Mark's home, including his clothes and in the living room, were crucial to the case. The fact that Mark had failed to assist in the search for his son when his remains were discovered, and his odd comments about the missing body, further fueled suspicions. In particular, the bizarre conversation Mark had with his other son Corey, where he discussed the need for the skull to be found before investigators could confirm blunt force trauma as the cause of death, was presented as a clear sign of his involvement. But it wasn't just circumstantial evidence that played a role in the trial. Mark's actions after Dylan's disappearance added to the mounting case against him. His refusal to take a polygraph test, coupled with his appearance on Dr. Phil, where he publicly exchanged accusations with Dylan's mother, only raised more questions about not only his credibility, but also his severe emotional detachment. The defense, however, maintained that Mark was the victim of a smear campaign and insisted that there was insufficient evidence to convict him of murder. One of the most striking moments in the trial came when the prosecution introduced the discovery of Dylan's skull, found 2 years after his initial remains were discovered. The skull was found further up Middle Mountain Road in an area where no known animal to the region could have transported the body. Forensic experts testified that the location of the skull suggested that someone had deliberately moved it, and it was not an animal. Despite the defense's claims, the jury deliberated and ultimately convicted Mark Redwine of second-degree murder and child abuse resulting in death. The conviction came after more than 8 years of legal battles and investigations. A long wait for justice. And on November 19th, 2021, Mark Redwine was sentenced to 48 years in prison. During the sentencing, Judge Jeffrey Wilson criticized Mark's utter lack of remorse and his failure to take even the most basic responsibility for his actions. Dylan's family, especially his mother, expressed relief and sorrow in equal measure. While the verdict brought a sense of justice, it could not bring back the son that they had lost. The trial had unveiled a devastating truth: that a father had turned on his own child in the most brutal way imaginable, forever leaving questions about what drove Mark Redwine to commit such a heinous act. Despite the verdict, questions still linger. What really happened in those hours leading up to Dylan's death? Could someone else have been involved? Or was this truly a crime of passion fueled by shame and rage? And why, even in the face of overwhelming evidence, does Mark Redwine maintain his innocence? The case of Dylan Redwine's tragic death highlights the critical issues of visitation in contentious custody battles. Dylan's strained relationship with his father was no secret. His reluctance to visit and his fears of his father were the key factors in unraveling this case. Visitation orders designed to promote parental bonding can sometimes place children in vulnerable situations, especially when one of those parents feels unsafe. Dylan's story serves as a tragic reminder of the potential consequences when such dynamics are ignored or minimalized in family court, raising essential questions about child welfare and protective measures in custody arrangements. Dylan suffered a fate that no one, especially a child, should ever experience, let alone at the hands of his own father. What Mark did goes against every single natural instinct any parent would, or in this story's case, should have.
An Ohio man has admitted to killing 3 people who surprised him while he was burglarizing a home. Matthew Hoffman was sentenced to life in prison without parole for the deaths of Tina Herman, whose home he had broken into, her 11-year-old son Cody Maynard, and neighbor Stephanie Stein. Hoffman dismembered the victim.
In the quiet town of Mount Vernon, Ohio, the disappearance of a mother, her 2 kids, and her friend would set off a chain of events so bizarre that it would leave the community and investigators stunned. The case began on November 10th, 2010, when 32-year-old Tina Herman, her 13-year-old daughter Sarah, her 11-year-old son Cody, and family friend 41-year-old Stephanie Sprang vanished without a trace. They were last seen in Tina's home, and the disappearance left a trail of confusion and fear. No one could have imagined the horrors that would soon unfold in the search for them. Days passed and the search intensified. Family, friends, and law enforcement scoured the area, hoping to find a clue. But as the hours turned into days, the questions only deepened. Where could they have gone? Had they left voluntarily? Or had something sinister happened to them? No one had any answers. Matthew Hoffman, a man with a history of strange and unsettling behavior, became a person of interest rather quickly when he seemingly kept popping up on police radar once the investigation began. For starters, Matthew was seen driving suspiciously in the area where Tina lived. Shortly into the investigation, police found garbage bags and a large tarp inside of Tina's home. Both of these items were traced back to being purchased at a local Walmart, and after reviewing security tapes, police found a man matching Matthew Hoffman buying these particular items. It was confirmed to be him after they ran the license plate on the truck the man in question got into and left the store in. When police arrived at Matthew's house with a search warrant, expecting to find something that would lead to the whereabouts of Tina, Sarah, Cody, and Stephanie, they got much more than anyone could have predicted. Bound and gagged in a basement was 13-year-old Sarah. Police quickly arrested Matthew and freed Sarah, but now they could only fearfully worry about the fates of the other three. Matthew Hoffman didn't seem to be connected to this family in any way. He had no ties to the victims, and his motivations were unclear. So why would he target this particular family? Hoffman's story seemed to evolve with every interview, his demeanor growing more unsettling as investigators pieced together his twisted tale. And then Matthew confessed. In his confession, Hoffman claimed that he had been living in a fantasy world, driven by a compulsion to kidnap and control others. He revealed that he had been stalking Tina and her family for weeks before he struck, planning the abduction carefully. But his reasoning seemed very vague and almost incoherent, as if he was searching for a justification for his actions. Did Matthew truly understand the depths of his crimes, or had he simply been living in a delusional state of mind? As Matthew Hoffman's trial began, the horrors that Sarah had to endure during her captivity were shocking. She had been forced to witness the deaths of her mother and her brother, and then following that was being held hostage in a dark and cold basement. But there were things that many couldn't help but wonder. How had Hoffman managed to keep Sarah captive? And why had he chosen to let her live? Was it out of some twisted sense of mercy, or had he simply not finished his plan? Matthew Hoffman was ultimately convicted of multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, and aggravated burglary. But the questions surrounding the case still remained. What drove this man to commit such a horrifying act? And could he have been stopped sooner? What other dark secrets did Matthew Hoffman carry, buried deep in his psyche? The chilling details to the case left the town of Mount Vernon shaken, with no clear answers to the many lingering questions about what truly motivated Matthew Hoffman to commit his heinous crimes. Matthew Hoffman's life before the horrific crimes he committed in November of 2010 is shrouded in mystery. To most, he appeared to be just another quiet, unassuming person. Born in 1980 in Warren, Ohio, Matthew grew up in a seemingly normal household with his parents, Robert and Patricia. He was often described as a quiet, solitary child, sometimes a bit strange, but nothing about him screamed danger. He had an odd fascination with trees, particularly leaves, which is an interest that would later seem disturbingly present in light of his actions. Matthew's early years weren't without incident, however. In 2001, he was arrested in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, for a series of crimes that would foreshadow the darkness to come. He was convicted of first-degree arson, burglary, and theft after setting fire to a condominium complex. The blaze caused extensive damage, and Matthew was actually sentenced to 8 years in prison for this. While the incident marked a significant moment in his life, it didn't immediately signal the monstrous path that he was eventually going to take. Upon his release from prison, Matthew's behavior began to take an even stranger turn. His neighbors in Mount Vernon started noticing unusual and unsettling habits. Matthew, who worked as a professional tree trimmer, began spending hours alone in trees, often perched high in his backyard watching his neighbors from a secluded vantage point. His fixation with nature had transformed into something far darker. Despite these bizarre activities, no one could have predicted the unthinkable violence that would later erupt from Matthew. His odd behaviors were chalked up to eccentricity, but the true horror of what he was capable of remained hidden, simmering right beneath the surface. Which has now led us to the fateful day where everything finally boiled over. On November 10th, 2010, Matthew spent the night in the woods, and while hiding in his sleeping bag, he observed the home of 41-year-old Tina Herman. As the morning light crept over the trees, Matthew saw his opportunity. Tina had left for work, and the door to her garage wasn't fully shut. Matthew crept inside, intending only to steal, but soon, everything would spiral into unspeakable violence. Before the day was over, Tina, her son Cody, and their friend Stephanie Spring would be dead. But the story obviously doesn't end there. When Sarah arrived home, she became Matthew's next target. But instead of just outright killing her, he bound the girl with rope and duct tape and held her captive for 4 days in his Mount Vernon home. Days passed as authorities scrambled to locate the missing girl, unaware of the true horror that she was enduring. She was held in Matthew's basement, in a room surrounded by thousands of leaves, her hands and feet bound. Yet, Matthew's confession painted a disturbing picture of his twisted perception of his actions. He claimed that he'd shown her kindness, letting her play video games and even cooking her hamburgers, all while holding her captive. Could a man like Matthew truly believe that he was treating her well? Or was he simply just trying to justify the monstrous actions in his own mind? On November 14th, just 4 days after the horrific crimes, police finally tracked Matthew to his home. There, they found him sleeping on a couch, but it was what they uncovered in the basement that revealed the extent of his depravity. A makeshift bed of leaves, a barricaded door, and an eerily quiet atmosphere. When they opened the door to the basement, they found Sarah, terrified, but alive. The nightmare wasn't over, but at least for one victim, the horror had ended. The trial of Matthew Hoffman was a chilling exploration into the mind of a man who turned a simple burglary into a nightmare of abduction and murder. As the case progressed, a disturbing picture of Matthew's psyche began to emerge. One that forced the court to reckon with the cold, calculating nature of his crimes. Matthew pled guilty to all charges, which included aggravated murder, rape, kidnapping, and burglary. His guilty plea spared the victims' families from having to endure a lengthy trial. But the unsettling details of his actions, revealed in court and through his confessions, raised questions that lingered long after the final verdict. Prosecutors detailed Matthew's well-thought-out plan that day. Matthew had arrived prepared with a hunting knife, not simply to rob the house, but to carry out his violent acts. The trial revealed that Matthew had agreed to cooperate with authorities in exchange for a promise from the prosecutor's office that the death penalty would not be pursued. This deal gave Matthew a chance to avoid facing the ultimate punishment, but it also meant that he would have to lead investigators to the bodies of his victims and provide a full written confession. On November 18th, 2010, Matthew took investigators to a hollow tree in the Kokosing Wildlife Area, where he had hidden the bodies of Tina, Cody, and Stephanie. In his confession, Matthew detailed how he had actually used a pulley system to hoist the bodies into the hollow tree, a method that only underscored the chilling planning that went into his crime. The fact that he was willing to lead authorities to the remains suggested an unsettling level of detachment. as if the act of the murder was not something that haunted him, but simply a task that had to be completed. As Matthew sat in court, he offered chilling accounts of his days holding Sarah captive. In his confession, Matthew had insisted that he treated her with kindness, but authorities and the prosecution made it clear that this image of himself as a benevolent captor was nothing more than a self-serving narrative. He even claimed that he was negotiating with her family over a ransom, but this was simply another delusion. The details of Matthew's behavior raised questions about his true understanding of his actions. Even in the face of overwhelming evidence, his demeanor throughout the trial suggested a man who had little remorse for the pain that he had caused. And despite his calculated actions, Matthew tried to convince investigators and the public that he had been driven by some irrational impulse. But the facts told a different story. A story of a man who, despite the horror he inflicted, believed that he had done nothing wrong. Matthew's trial also revealed the complex negotiations between his defense team and the prosecution. The sheriff of Knox County had made it clear that Matthew's cooperation was crucial in solving the case. By leading authorities to the bodies and providing a confession, Matthew would avoid the death penalty. The deal was seen as a necessary evil, allowing the families of the victims to find closure while ensuring that Matthew would be held accountable for his actions. In the end, Matthew was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The trial may have provided some answers about his actions, but it left many simply unanswered. What was the root cause of his violence? Was it the product of mental illness? Or was he simply a man who found power in the ability to control and kill? And why did Matthew choose to spare the life of the girl that he kidnapped, only to subjugate her to unimaginable torment? While the trial concluded with Matthew's conviction, the answer to these questions remained buried in the darkness of his mind. Sarah Maynard, the teen who survived Matthew Hoffman's horrific kidnapping and murder spree, spoke in 2011 about the strength and courage that helped her endure the unimaginable. Despite the terror of being held captive by Matthew, who had murdered her mother and her younger brother, Sarah's resilience stood out. Knox County Sheriff David Barber called Sarah the epitome of bravery, and Larry Maynard, her father, praised her strength. "I think she taught me far more than I could probably ever teach her about life." For Sarah, her strength lies in her determination to move forward. "What keeps me strong is making my life go on and not thinking about what happened in the past." Sarah Maynard's story is one of survival against the odds, a chilling reminder of the strength the human spirit can summon in the face of unspeakable terror. Abducted, bound, and held captive in the basement of a man who had just taken the lives of her family, Sarah's resilience allowed her to endure what most could not even imagine. Despite the horrors that she witnessed, she managed to stay focused, awaiting the moment when she could escape. Her survival is not just a testament to her courage, but also her unwavering determination to move beyond the trauma and rebuild. Sarah's ability to find hope in the aftermath, to keep pushing forward despite the dark shadows of the past, is an inspiring reminder of the power of perseverance. And while her journey is far from over, one thing is certain: Sarah Maynard will not be defined by what happened to her, but by the strength that she found within to rise above it.